Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Jeff Tucker. I'm CEO of Tucker Company Worldwide. This is the next in our series of 15-minute webinars, updating folks on what the marketplace and what we're seeing. I'm going to be introducing one of our executives here in just a moment. This quote on the screen, it's by Paul Getty. If ever this wasn't was true, it's the last 12, 14 months in business, maybe 16, 18 months in business. You've got to love at least the uncertainty in dealing with it in supply chain in order to have a career. And what would life be without a little bit of uncertainty to manage through? I'm going to just kind of frame a little bit at a high level and turn it over to Mike Mellencamp, one of our executives. Institute of Supply Management this week came out with news and data on their manufacturing index. Dropped just a little bit from its position in June to July. And the good news is it still reflects 14 consecutive months of U.S. factory output increases. But again, it's the lowest amount of increase since January. So I don't know if we can say, hey, are we out of the woods yet, this crisis, with this capacity crisis, because there are a lot of shoes left to drop in the supply chain. Just two examples from just this past weekend. I spent time with an executive from a auto dealership. They own many dealerships along the East Coast. And you name the brand and they probably sell them. And they were talking about the logistics involved in trying to coat the parking lot and paint lines on the parking lot. Typically, that's a Herculean effort. You've got to move these 40 cars. You do this piece. You move them back in. But now they've got no cars on the lot. Very few cars at all. And that is a supply chain that is a major one that really has yet to come back onto line in any kind of way, shape, or form. Related to that is a Volkswagen bumper that I was told by another friend related that there is a 3,000 back order log jam to get that bumper. So these are, again, you can point to many different supply chains, restaurant, travel, whatever, wherever you look, there are supply chains that just aren't online yet. And when those supply chains do come online, they will tend to disrupt transportation, disrupt supply chains as we know them today. So calling an end to what we're into right now, I'm not big into predictions, but I wouldn't do it quite yet. So I would like to introduce Mike Mellencamp. Mike is our Vice President of Strategy and Projects and oversees our capacity team among some other responsibilities. Mike?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everybody. I get the fun part of trying to explain what's going on the ground here in comparison to the data we're seeing in the marketplace. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so trying to help us understand and balance what we are seeing from industry data and analysts with what is actually happening on the ground and the sentiments and uncertainty and the sound that we're hearing in the marketplace. And I frame that with two kind of general questions. And as one is, do we really feel like we have reached supply and demand equilibrium? Or is this just July? Is this the end of July and summer? And similarly, is the pricing, the elevated pricing that we've all been seeing and feeling, a new normal, a new baseline for the industry, or is there more volatility ahead, up or down? So I'm going to dive in real quickly. I'm going to share some of the slides that we've seen before, just to touch base. They'll be available in our slide deck next week as we share that. But just to get a couple of indicators. So this is FreightWave Sonar outbound tender volume. So how much volume of freight is being tendered? And the blue line across the top here is 2021. Other 2018 is the orange line, or 2020 is the orange line from last year. And what we see is number one, there's still more volume relative to last year at this time than we've had. But we do see a gradual, a decline here. But that decline aligns well with previous year's July's, the seasonality effect. So again, is this July or is this ongoing? Truckstop.com is another indicator of market demand, and each line here represents a different equipment type, a different type of trailer and freight being hauled. And again here, week 28-30 is kind of this area is where we are today, and we've seen that decline in demand, meaning there's less demand for that equipment, but we're still at very elevated levels, some of the highest levels we've been at. And if you go back a year, we also see a slight decline in the same time period. So again, is this July or is this something longer term? And one last point that Jeff has mentioned in previous webinars is the Morgan Stanley Index. And again, same thing, slightly less dramatic, a slower decline in demand. This is specific to dry van freight. But again, elevated levels and following previous year's seasonality. So this is kind of the framework of which we are looking at the industry data and saying, hey, all right, is this really the end of a capacity crisis, or is this just July? And balance that with what we're seeing from truckstop.com's spot rates. Spot rates seemingly haven't declined, at the same pace. They've plateaued, maybe slightly declined, but we're not seeing that return to normal. We're seeing kind of a leveling at this elevated level that we've all been feeling. So that's the data, right? That's the analysis that we're seeing in the marketplace. And I want to talk to you about what we're seeing from our carriers, what we're seeing on the ground and on the road. And this is the balance that we want to talk about. And it's that carriers are still under immense pressure. The same problems still exist for them that they are working through. They've been working through for the last 12 months of this freight cycle. And that includes driver recruiting and retention, top of every carrier's mind right now. How do I keep the drivers I have, and how can I maybe get some more to handle this volume that I'm getting? And they're literally competing with pay packages and incentive packages, not only against each other, as Jeff mentioned, last month, but they're also competing against industrial jobs locally that are coming back online and looking for work. So it's very difficult for them to keep drivers on board. And when they get them, they're trying to figure out when their trucks are coming. Jeff just mentioned automotive delays. Commercial automotives are seeing the same things, where truck orders are delayed and back ordered. And they don't know when they're getting their equipment. Talk to carriers that actually have drivers and don't have trucks to put them in. So another level of unpredictability. And I'm jumping down, but 12 months ago during lockdown, a lot of tourist economies almost went dormant, and those freight networks were significantly diminished or disappeared. And now with the economy reopening, people traveling again, those tourist networks and all of the services and supplies that feed those are back online and trying to play catch up. And so now again, carriers are having to readjust their network to try to accommodate these lanes that are now returning. But the biggest thing that we hear consistently, and it's because of the service impact, is the continued delays at distribution centers, these big shipping receiving facilities, where carriers have to predict how long it's going to take their drivers to get unloaded so that they can schedule the next load. And what we're hearing across the industry is the delays are long and they're unpredictable. Sometimes what was a 2-hour delay is a 4 or 6 hour delay, 8. Sometimes drivers are being told to just come back tomorrow. We don't have enough people to get you offloaded today. If you miss an appointment, you might be 2-3 days out. And what does that mean for carriers is they can't literally get to their next load. So they're late for one load, they're now late for the next customer's loads, and they're trying to figure out how to balance all of these networks as well as retain drivers. So that's the pinch. And the one pinch that we haven't seen yet that is potentially coming is August 31st is the end of the hours of service waiver for COVID-19 essential goods, which, when it is in place, enables drivers to drive beyond their hours of service if they're hauling essential goods, to be able to get them to delivery, to be able to get them. So things like food, medical supplies, and that ends. So, we haven't heard of drivers driving 20 hours at a time, but yeah, drivers get stuck in traffic. They can maybe go that extra hour to get to that delivery and get that load off and take their break. If this ends, that will go away. So there's also a potential reduction in capacity from a driver and carrier perspective that could be coming as soon as September. So what does this mean for us? What do we do with this information? And I think the message here is that carriers have a lot on their plate and probably aren't feeling that collective breath that the economy seems to be taking, and the freight network seems to be taking in July. They have a lot on their plate, and they're not really ready to hear about this being over. And so what do we do as shippers and participants in this marketplace? And that's evaluation. It's what Tucker recommends, is speaking with your carriers, looking at your own network. Where are your true pain points? And what about those pain points can we evaluate, potentially fix? Are they favorable to a driver and a carrier so that carriers want to work with us on those lanes? And these aren't new thoughts, these aren't new practices, but there could also be a sentiment out there that, ooh, things feel soft. Let's go do a network bid and see if we can pull back in some of that, those rates that we've been absorbing. We don't think that this is the time for that. Carriers aren't ready for that. And what we've actually seen is that bids can bring attention to your network and, allow carriers the opportunity to reevaluate their business and potentially raise pricing, or even just shed lanes that they don't think fit their networks or fit their drivers anymore. So we think the better approach there is looking at your network, looking with your shipping and receiving locations, do what you can to make them favorable, but then have conversations with carriers and try to pull those people in, because there's so much on a carrier's plate right now. One last point that we think as we look into the second half of 2021 is being cognizant of the influences that are in front of us. We are walking into a demand season relative to our traditional peak. And what is that going to do, right? That is going to put more demand on these networks as we get into those seasons. What impact is that going to have? Do we have the drivers? Do we have the capacity to handle that? Also, other freight networks, ports, railroads, LTL, continue to be at capacity, congestion, backlogs, right? We talked last time about railroad networks being slow, having trouble getting things in and out of ramps. Ports still have ships waiting to get offloaded and container stacks bigger and higher than they've ever been. So that problem also has not been resolved. There's still that backlog. And then looking at the second half of the year of some of the things that we see, the clear and present one is we're walking into hurricane season. It's just starting up, and we already have wildfires in the West, in the mountains. So, those regional impacts can have serious impacts to capacity, let alone FEMA becoming a player in the freight marketplace, trying to buy trucks in order to get those, needed relief supplies to those locations. And then something that we've learned from our own experiences in these times when carriers are going, trying to meet customer demand, trying to, get all this freight delivered, and it's a carrier friendly market right now, so they want to make that money while they can. Is there a sense of deferred maintenance? Equipment is in high stress, high use. They're waiting for new equipment, and could you see a higher incidence of mechanical breakdowns? Something that we've seen before in similar times, and also something that we noted in 2018 was when drivers were driving for a prolonged period of time and kind of just burning and turning and burning, that they reached a point of fatigue, and that hit back then, the week of Christmas and New Year's, where we saw a large segment of drivers go on vacation, take a break, and take a prolonged break, a week, 2 weeks off. and that, immediate removal of driver capacity from the marketplace, temporary, but had a large impact. So we've seen this in this 12-month freight cycle, people really, really turning, working hard, doing what they can. And what could that potentially mean? So that's what we see. That's what I see. It is a little bit of balance to, again, saying, hey, it looks like things might be slowing down, but we at Tucker have believed that there is, significant questions that are unanswered, that there's, a good possibility for volatility in the future. And that's kind of what we're looking at and continue to be talking about. With that, thank you everybody for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative. We still have the question and answers if there are any questions, but in the meantime, please join us on September 23rd. It's our next webinar, 15 minutes at noon. We hope that you guys can make it. And I think that's about it. Jeff, do you want to wrap up?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, that's noon Eastern. And Mike, great job letting us know your vantage point. And it's one of the things that we said. We know a lot of people. Obviously, we know Mike. He works here. We know a lot of people in the industry, and as we identify subjects that need subject matter experts, that's what we're going to do. We're going to bring them in, and Mike did a great job. Mike and folks on the call, there is a question that came in prior to the webinar. And I think Mike's answers or Mike's discussion kind of answered that question. But Mike, the question involved, how do you foresee, what can you tell us about the future in the marketplace? Paraphrased. And I'll throw that out to you as the first question.
Yeah, I think that's the question everybody wants to know. And myself and Tucker are certainly not in the predictive business, but I think if we read what we are seeing, and also in that Morgan Stanley analysis brings in some shipper, carrier, and perspective, I think the sentiment is that we're probably looking to stay level, and maybe even a slight uptick in demand or potentially pricing, based on what happens seasonally here. So there is very little sentiment that this is going to get any easier in the next 3 months, or that capacity is generally going to become abundant in the next 3 months. So I think staying neutral, staying level probably feels about right. But I think given some of the things we just laid out, there's some key questions that have to be answered, or will be answered, or won't be answered, and then there's those uncontrollable events that could really tip the scales, to really put pressure on capacity, increase demand, and put pressure on pricing. So that's kind of the feel that we've been hearing and seeing recently, that there's some cautious optimism, but that's about it.
I'll just throw in there, additional perspective from, the 2003 to 5 capacity crisis, the 2017-18 capacity crisis. These took a year and a half to work through. We're a year and a month. But those, as we said in the last webinar, those capacity crises were different than this one. You didn't have an entire economy shut down. You didn't have segments of the economy shut down for. It was a overall overarching softness, in terms of, an overarching feeling. Everyone felt the same way. That car example and the truck example, new truck example Mike gave, those are we're living through new times. So could it be a year and a half? It very well could be. Could we feel echoes of this past that year and a half? Very well could be. But again, we don't predict. We just manage with the best knowledge that we can gain and work from there. But uncertainty is inherent in this business, and we choose to embrace it and try to figure out what the next best steps are. I don't see any other questions, so we're gonna end the webinar and let you guys folks get back to your day. Thank you for joining us. Again, we're going to send this webinar out to a copy of this out to everyone. So you will receive a copy of this, and we look forward to any feedback. Please send to either of those email addresses, or when you receive the slides, you can send the feedback and suggestions for future webinars topics. Thank you very much. Have a great day.